I mean, they're really sitting in the catbird seat. They can decide what a nice street corner in Shanghai, who it's going to go to. Of course, every developer is going to want to bribe them. Corruption, big, big, big problem. And it's scared the bejesus out of the Communist Party because they know this is really what makes people angry. So these kinds of problems lurk beneath the surfaces of this incredible success. But the energy that's been released in this experiment, this sort of amazing experiment that Deng Xiaoping launched, continues. And you cannot help but feel it. And in many ways, the reason why it's so exciting and why so many American young people are going over to China today is because it's also very American. I mean, that was what, you know, we always thought America was about. Can do, whatever it takes. Get it done. You know, a land of opportunity and freedom where an immigrant can come, no education, can't speak English. 20 years later, they're a millionaire and they're sending their kids to Harvard. I mean, that was the promise of America. And this promise now, in some degree, certainly not politically speaking, but economically speaking, is very, very seductive and very real. Now, I've spoken about the kind of odd relationship with the United States, both economically speaking and the sort of dysfunction of them lending, us buying. But the reality of this relationship is that we're married, but with no option for divorce. These two countries can't get divorced. If they get divorced, not only will each of them, I think, be in much graver peril of collapsing, but the world will be completely deranged, the global economy. And it turns out there are other reasons why divorce is unthinkable. And I'm going to show you a few pictures at the end to graphically represent one of them. I'll only mention it briefly here. That is climate change. We're both putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, causing a lot of global warming, and the consequences to each country are severe. Much more severe for China than they will be for the United States, but severe for both of us. And together, the United States and China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. The United States is second. We burn a lot of coal. But if the two countries cannot get together to figure out how to work this problem out, there'll be no solution. So there's another area, you know, besides trade, and there's even more areas where we are insolubly bound together and we can't escape each other. Now, I wanted to, you know, the theme of the talk tonight is the Chinese model a viable one? Is it, in a certain sense, beating out the American model? But to answer that question, you really have to look at the United States for a bit here, too. Now, we find several things sort of running into us here in the United States in short order, which has also helped to change the way in which the angle of repose of the playing field lies. One of them, of course, is that this global economic crisis has just hit the country and the world. And we found that our financial system was really strung out on cheap debt, cheap lending, and was completely out of balance. And we're trying frantically to bring it back into balance. China was much less affected by this. They had none of these bad loans. They had none of this bad debt because they were a more closed system. And so while they had effects of the global slowdown because other people weren't buying as much of their exports, they didn't have the same problems we did. So this was a huge blow to our system and a huge blow to the confidence of the United States, the very thing which we were almost, you know, evangelistic about. We were preaching to the world about the great virtues of American-style market economy. It turned out, under the deregulation that began with Ronald Reagan, continued with George Bush, we had just pushed the country right to the edge of a cliff, and it was just about to fall over. We still don't know if we're going to completely be able to arrest it. So this was a huge shock to the United States. And then, paradoxically, a second big shock came to our country, and that was that Washington is now paralyzed. It can't do anything. It's gotten so partisan. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are so incapable of working together that it can't deliver. And this raises the very interesting and I think extremely alarming question. If we look at these two systems, the one I've described in a cursory manner that's developed in China, that's very dynamic but rather unintegrated with political reform, a system of marketized authoritarian capitalism. And then if we look at the Chinese Communist Party, which we used to think, the common wisdom was, well, they must be in transition to being more open, more democratic. That's the way things go. You make some money, you get a middle class, they're going to want democracy. It hasn't really happened. It turns out that the middle class that China has developed kind of likes the Chinese Communist Party and their very strict control because they have some money to protect. They don't want chaos. They don't want those migrant laborers out storming around the city, burning things up and tearing the things down. So they're in a rather interesting situation where perhaps the common wisdom that China was going to slowly develop into something that more resembled a Western democracy may not be true. Maybe the model that they have developed, without quite meaning to and without really expecting to, is a model. And at the same time that that rather difficult question poses itself, we in America are confronted with another question of our model. Remember the city on the hill? You know, America was the promise of the world. Democracy connected to a free market. Every immigrant in the world wanted to come to America. Many of them still do. And now we find, A, our economy collapsed, and our vaunted financial system turned out to be like a gambling casino run by a bunch of card sharks. But B, our political system can't deliver. Can't pass anything. It can't deal with the health care reform. It can't deal with climate change. It can hardly deal with the financial crisis. There's been no real reforms yet. They've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, but they haven't reformed the system. And they can't do it because the Congress is deadlocked. And there's no sense anymore that Republicans and Democrats should cooperate. In fact, it looks, I think, increasingly as though the Republican Party had decided the best way back into power is to destroy the American government and thereby tarnish Obama and make his promise hopeless. And then maybe they get back in power. That's a little bit like Lenin's theory of revolution. You can't reform. You can't deal with the capitalists. You can't deal with the opposition party. You have to destroy them and have a revolution. There is that possibility that just in the last few months, I think people are beginning to wonder if there's any way to moderate this. And so we find not only is the economic system broken, but the political system is broken. And it's very difficult for this system, for Washington, which most Americans now despise. They don't know whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. All they know is it doesn't work. It can't deliver. It can't solve the incredibly grave problems that now seem to be besetting this country. It can't do high-speed rail. It can't build new infrastructure. The schools, education system is collapsing. In my state of California, do you know where on a scale of 1 to 50 California education now ranks? I'll give you a hint. It's just below Mississippi. Anybody know? 50. And this was the Golden State, the most vaunted, praised